Hello, my beautiful people. It's your boy Dixon, ready to react to 65,000 NYC migrants just became homeless. Let's get to it.
Waves of asylum seekers arriving weekly. The city is evicting migrants from shelters to make room for new families.
These are single adults who've been in the system for 30 days and have not been able to prove that they faced extenuating.
Man, New York City's asylum crisis continues to grow, and every single week, thousands of people come here from the southern border looking for a place to stay. But since the city's shelters are full, the only way to house new people is to kick out the current people, which means that to solve homelessness, the city's gonna make tens of thousands of people homeless. What a plan.
With more than 65,000 migrants currently in the city shelter system, the city says it can no longer indefinitely house and feed these migrants.
It worries me not knowing where I will go with my kids, especially because I have 3 small children.
I don't know what will be happening next.
Neighbors say the influx of migrants is overwhelming.
It's unfair on them, it's unfair on us.
We've got trash, we've got the constant noise. I mean, it's like Times Square when you come out of your home.
The evictions today are part of a new policy that allow migrants to claim a shelter bed for only 30 or 60 days.
The advocates say they are very concerned that this will lead to an uptick in street homelessness.
We are connecting them to resources, and we are talking to them about what those next steps are.
A lot of people inside shelter, if they just went out on the street, they're gonna cause a lot of problems.
Migrants can receive an extension and stay longer than 30 days if they can demonstrate that they have extenuating circumstances.
There is so many people that, with all the will in the world, we can't help them.
Where do they come from?
So New York City's tough new shelter rules just kicked in, meaning thousands of people will soon be evicted. But what nobody's talking about is that on the one hand, the city is telling everyone to leave, but on the other hand, they're telling everyone that they can stay as long as they've got a valid reason, which has people lining up to try and game the system according to critics. But the sad truth is many people who came here by bus and enrolled in the shelter system did so under false pretenses, saying they were promised that they would not only get help applying for asylum, but housing and care to get back on their feet, along with access to education, and most importantly, assistance finding a job. But if you ask the people who are in line right now with no job trying to get a place to stay, they'll tell you it didn't work out that way. Yet the process of getting a work permit is up to the federal government, and right now all over town you've got local groups protesting the fact that people are here who can't do anything. But if you think caring for 65,000 people who've been lied to sounds like a problem, things are about to get even worse for the city, because all over town you've got local advocacy groups upset that shelters in their neighborhoods exist. Residents are complaining that the shelters bring disruptions to their neighborhoods and occupy valuable public resources. And that exposes the real reason why we have an asylum crisis here that looks the way that it does. Because recent polling indicates 80% of New Yorkers are in favor of right to shelter. Yet for some reason, every time the city tries to set up a shelter in a various neighborhood, that's always the wrong location. It's always either inhumane or unsafe, or it's just the wrong place. And at the same time, residents are furious with the city that the people in those same shelters can't earn a living and provide for themselves. Yet that is a federal issue. That's not something the mayor has any control over, which means New Yorkers may be ignorant of the ramifications of policies they say they're in favor of. Because even though the mayor wants to, he can't just magically put people to work. On top of that, even though it looks like the city's new policy of evicting everybody after as little as 30 days is designed to bring this crisis to an end, there are so many holes in this new system of evictions that critics say it's going to make the asylum crisis drag out longer. While at the exact same time, bus after bus from the southern border continues to arrive, bringing thousands of people who need a place to stay. And some people say this new plan of evictions combined with all of the new arrivals is a recipe for disaster.
Let's see. Maybe the government has some plans.
Meanwhile, 1,300 migrants arrived in New York City last week. Beginning Wednesday, the city started evicting migrants from shelters under a new policy that limits the amount of time an asylum seeker can claim a bed. Let's bring in CBS News.
So here we are inside the bus terminal where folks arrive from the southern border, but we can't have a crisis here in New York City unless there's another bigger crisis off in the distance somewhere south of here. And that is exactly the current situation that we have. 3,700 people a day cross the southern border, and every week you have around 1,300 1,300 people on average arriving here in the city. And by the way, that's just the official number of people that the city knows have arrived who've gone through its various intake and processing centers. Anybody who comes here and doesn't go through the official way to get housing, the city may not know they exist. Which makes it pretty hard to manage shelter bed capacity if you don't have any firm idea of who may need a place to stay and who may not. Which is why the city's shelters are completely maxed out right now and they're telling people to leave. And what's crazy about that is it means the same rules that were designed to stop people from being homeless are now the reason people are homeless, making this a revolving door operation that critics say helps nobody.
So here's the thing, the New York City officials are just run out of space. And so they've decided on a new policy that allows them to limit the stay for adult males and adult families with no children to 30 days. And the reason for it is that they're hoping to be able to move about 15,000 people out of shelter and into some kind of permanency, whether it's leaving the city or finding...
So the city claims it doesn't want to kick people out, which makes sense to me, but this idea that everyone is transitioning to permanent housing, or at least a majority are, that's being disputed. And that's because the evictions themselves, they do clear shelter bed space, but they also do something else. And the fascinating thing about them is that most of the people who get kicked out don't come back. Almost half the families who've been evicted from shelters haven't returned, and families can reapply as often as they want. They're not banned from getting another shot. And that means the real number of evictions for single adults is likely higher because they don't have kids in school. It's easier for them to pack up and leave and go wherever they want. And they aren't eligible for the prepaid debit cards that help with nutrition assistance. And as bad as this sounds, when the asylum crisis first started, the mayor actually tried to cancel right to shelter, but he was blocked. Had he been able to block right to shelter, the people already in the shelter system probably would have gotten to stay for a lot longer than 30 days. Yet the mayor was unsuccessful in his efforts, and over the preceding 9 months, he had to negotiate with local activists who were calling for the city to maintain an unlimited right to shelter policy that would apply to everybody, even if the city was tapped out as far as resources go. And now we've got a situation that kicks people out of the shelters before they've done their job, which is supposed to be to prepare people to enter society as contributing members of it.
What are the concerns right now that this could lead to an increase in homelessness in the city?
Well, you see, in terms of the 30-day policy, you can have extenuating circumstances. So, for example, if you've had a major medical procedure or like a pregnancy...
Okay, so if this system isn't going to lead to homelessness and anybody who wants to reapply can as long as they have a valid excuse, what exactly is going on here? Because this article right here reveals that most people are getting approved for an extension if they want one. In fact, out of the 190 people who requested an extension, 119 got one, which is a 60% reapplication acceptance rate. And this brings up a few questions that nobody really has any good answers to. For example, how much vetting does the city do? Are they checking people's leases? Are they contacting people's landlords? Are they talking to doctors to see if the medical appointments are verified? And if the city's willing to let a good number of people stay in the shelters if they want, why do they have a system that forces people to wait in the hot sun or in the rain potentially to beg for another placement? Has the city created a program that is deliberately inconvenient or one that rewards possible deception? The sad reality is most likely that the city understands the more difficult they make it for you to get replaced in a shelter, the more people will say, you know what, I've had enough of this, I am just gonna leave town. Which is somewhat ironic because this is America's largest sanctuary city, and as an immigrant you'd expect there to be more sympathy for your cause here than anywhere else, yet that's not necessarily the case. And nowhere is that more obvious and more true than in areas of town where the city has been able to set up shelters that are successful by its standards, yet local residents are furious that the shelters are still there, and they're not exactly hiding it.
I'm not getting shit. I don't know what is going on. If the local residents saying the shelters are there, and the government is saying
so here we are on Hall Street at the city's largest shelter for asylum seekers that is not a gigantic tent in a field somewhere. These facilities that you see behind me, you have one shelter that is designed for families and another down the street that is designed for single adults. This article actually says almost 4,000 people live in these two buildings. And what's crazy is that even though 80% of New Yorkers say they're in favor of right to shelter, residents here want these two facilities shut down, or at least they want more resources put into the neighborhood. Because their complaints are that these shelters are too large for the infrastructure that's here already.
A new plea to the city for more resources to help with the migrant crisis in Clinton Hill, Brooklyn.
Neighbors say crowds are creating noise and trash and that the asylum seekers need an opportunity to make a living.
So when you hear the word more resources, that's residents saying that there's a problem and the city needs to fix it somehow. Either by spending money in some capacity to make it so that the resources that are here are more plentiful, or by controversially removing the resources that are here so that everything disappears. millionaires. And even though local residents are not exactly happy with the presence of this particular facility, if you had to pick a location for a shelter that was going to house a lot of people, this is a pretty good spot for it. It's in an out-of-the-way location. It's literally next to an expressway. Across the street, you have cars parked under a bridge. And the building itself used to be a former mixed-use space, commercial, industrial. But what's unbelievable is how many local residents have a problem with the existence of this facility. This is like the only location, yet here we've got a packed town hall of people who are upset.
Sitting outside on a warm spring night, neighbors say the influx of migrants in Clinton Hill is overwhelming.
It's unfair on them, it's unfair on us.
We've got trash, we've got the constant noise. I mean, it's like Times Square when you come out of your home.
There are 2 shelters.
Did you hear that? Neighbors are saying that this shelter is unfair to the people who've decided to move in. Now, definitely a system that evicts people after 30 days is not a fair system. However, to say that the facility is overcrowded when it meets the city's standards for how many people can live somewhere, that makes it look like residents are searching for reasons for why the shelter needs to go. And perhaps the asylum seekers feel that this is the best place for them. They've traveled very far to come here, and many who go to the reapplication facility want to stay if they can. But residents are saying they can't bear the presence of the shelter in this neighborhood, and neither can the asylum seekers. And they're saying people don't deserve to live in a room that has several hundred beds in it. They're saying it's not the asylum seekers, we just need a new paradigm for how we're going to go about dealing with this. That's what they're saying, but the city had to build this place in line with fire code and in line with its other regulations, and the people saying that, these are millionaires living in condos around here, or at least people that are able to pay several $1,000s a month in rent and earn a living in this economy. It's a different standard that they have. And what's interesting about these comments is you don't hear them about the city's other shelter system, which is technically separate than the one for asylum seekers, which houses people who are New Yorkers. No one's saying that their conditions are inhumane, yet it's the same design.
There are 2 shelters nearby that house single individuals and families.
Trying to support the people who have come to this neighborhood with clothes, food, and all that kind of stuff, but there is so many people that with all the will in the world, we can't help them. We need something bigger here.
Neighbors posted.
Now, as someone who lives here and has been covering this for quite a while, it's hard to understand exactly where people are coming from. And what do they mean that they need something bigger here? This place is already massive. Maybe they want the city to invest more resources than it already is. However, New York's already a top destination for asylum seekers. And that's certainly not for a lack of generosity. The safety net here is already incredible. New York's got caseworkers lined up to help people as soon as they get here. There's clothing, there's food, there's medical resources, there's education for dependents like children. But perhaps the real issue here is that people think that these shelters are just too big for this neighborhood. They may have not expected that a shelter this big would end up here. The local news out reported as much, saying that residents were concerned about the exact size of these shelter systems. And what that means is, although many people in New York may say that they support the city's right to shelter, nobody really wants to be the first to offer that support or to be the recipient of that support, especially in this part of town, apparently. Okay, so here we are in Clinton Hill. This is the neighborhood where the shelters exist. They are a few blocks away, again, on the other side of that highway, and this looks and feels how it always has looked, which might make it look like the residents who say that they have a problem with how things are being handled are blowing things up out of proportion. At the same time, none of us live here, none of us have firsthand experience. We can only go by what the news tells us, and with what we see, which is one of the nicest neighborhoods in Brooklyn. But as you're about to see, that might be part of the problem.
Meanwhile, neighbors say they're doing what they can.
We're happy to help people. Like, we really are. Like, we did trash pickup. We've gotten the migrants to help us with the trash pickup. Like, they want to work.
Some are upset at their current quality.
So as a humble observer of this situation, what it looks like we're witnessing here is a misunderstanding of how U.S. immigration law actually works and what responsibilities the city, the state, and the federal government have. For example, at all of the city's shelters, residents need to understand money is being spent so people can claim asylum. This is a technical term, and somebody claiming asylum fears persecution or harm in their home country, which is why they don't want to return. And the people who are granted asylum are allowed to remain in the United States without fear of deportation. But what not everybody knows is that asylum is not a guaranteed right to just do whatever you want once you're here in America. And the reason you see so many people hanging out at the shelters, seemingly not doing anything, well, they are doing something. They're doing what they have to do, and that is wait for the asylum process to conclude. And right on the US government's own immigration website, it talks about how work permission needs to take 150 days. And not only is this how things work today, but this has been the law in this country for a long time, which makes it somewhat surprising that people seem to have a problem with it. Unless, of course, most New Yorkers don't understand how immigration and work authorization work together and what that process is actually like. Perhaps they're surprised that people are here with nothing to do.
The mayor's office says hundreds of migrants continue to show up every day. They tell us the city has spent more than $4 billion on the migrant crisis, and right now there are no extra funds to spend.
Yeah, I get it. People are upset with how the city's handling things at the shelter. Everybody knows that that's a bad situation, but what you may be looking at here is the result of people supporting policies they didn't fully understand at the time they supported them. That may explain why the city is spending millions of dollars on the asylum crisis, yet residents aren't really appreciative of that. They want the city to do more than it is. They want them to give out work permits, but the city can't do something like that. Which means it almost appears that just as the asylum seekers were baited and switched into enrolling in a system that wasn't actually going to help them, perhaps New Yorkers were baited and switched to an extent by not having their elected representatives fully explain what was going to happen if the asylum crisis played out the way that it has. That's the only explanation I can come up with for why folks who live around here are upset. But the main gripe that many residents seem to have is the issue of work permission. Nobody likes to see many folks who are able-bodied sitting around not being productive, and I'm sure that the people in that situation wish that they were working. However, what good would work permission actually do the asylum seekers? New York City apartments are some of the most expensive in the entire country. And if you're in one of the city's shelters and right now you're working a delivery job, it might be difficult to move up the economic ladder quickly enough to secure your own New York City apartment in 30 days. This is probably why the city's granting so many extensions. They know they're asking the impossible of people who've just gotten here. And the other problem, aside from the expensive, overpriced housing problem, is do we even have enough jobs? Is the economy even big enough to take in everybody who wants to start working immediately? Yes, New York's got a massive economy. You've got restaurants, you've got trucking. Every block here has hundreds of little businesses on it. But it might be that even if everybody gets a work permit today, the local economy doesn't have a position for them tomorrow, which could mean that even with a work permit, the housing situation and the job situation don't change for many of the folks that are in the shelters right now. And the city may have to continue supporting people who need assistance. And there's really no easy way to say this. If you want to live up here and have your coffee down here, you're gonna need a six-figure income. And this could mean the reason New York City's shelters keep growing, they keep signing new contracts and extending their current leases, building new facilities. This could be because city leaders are aware that this is going to continue for the foreseeable future, no matter what happens with things like work permits, because those won't immediately change the predicament of people who need assistance for more than 30 days. What do you think about that? Is New York City in a position where there's no way out of the asylum crisis? What would you do to fix it? How would you help the people who are in the shelters? Let me know. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.
I hope you've learned a lot in that video. So get some reaction. Tell us what you think. Tell us if the problem can be solved by the new government. And see you in the next video.